Greetings and salutations. This is Abe Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also become a bitter pill or a spoonful of sugar by visiting patreon.com/The Bitter Truth, where you can get some fabulous swag to make your life better. Today, I'm really excited. I've got a gentleman named Professor Bruce Lerro, and he is a founder of Planning Beyond Capitalism, which is an organization dedicated to creating systemic, methodical, and imaginative ways to shift from a failed system, basically. And Bruce has been with us or around for a while now, and I met him recently on Facebook and really dug his posts. And I've read his website, so we're gonna have a great time. It's gonna be a two-parter today. So we're gonna roughly go 30, 40 minutes the first part and 30, 40 minutes the second part. Bruce, how are you, man?
I'm great. I'm terrific. We got a little cottage industry going here with, writing and editing and things like that. So, given the virus, we're kind of staying out of the way, but we're being very productive with the time.
Are you susceptible yourself or?
No.
Okay, good.
No.
Good. So how long have you been with, how long has Planning Beyond Capitalism been an organization?
Okay, so we began in the fall of 2012, and we formed the organization because we were unhappy with Occupy. We were part of Occupy Oakland, and we were very disappointed that we felt like Occupy lost the focus on capitalism and social class that they started with. And so we just decided, okay, we're not going to wait anymore to find the right group. We're going to start our own group. So I would say the first 3 years, we focused much more on face-to-face groups, book clubs, forums, discussion groups. And we had a hard time really getting a large enough group. So in 2015, we began focusing more on electronic media. And so that's been our focus for the last 5 years. What we do is we post, radical analysis of the news, 3 or 4 posts a day. Then we also write articles ourselves on what's going on, perspectives, and we do that maybe about once a month. And our major thing is we also want to get working class people to write and to write from their experience. So we try to connect with people on Facebook that like our stuff and say, would you like to write for us? So that's it. We're doing pretty well as far as like outreach, and we it's like our baby. We work at this about 15 hours a week, keeping it going.
Good. And you teach college where? I'm sorry.
Well, I was teaching up until 2 years ago. I taught at Diablo Valley College, Chapman University, Dominican University. So I'm like what you call a Rhodes Scholar or a freeway flyer. Mm-hmm. And I stopped doing that a couple of years ago, and now I just teach. I'm up here in Olympia, and I kind of teach adult education. Okay. So it's been really cool to be teaching that. But with the virus, I didn't really want to start trying to teach classes through Zoom. So that's a loss, but right. Hopefully it'll come back.
Yeah, sure. No kidding. I mean, in a lot of industries, I mean, this is, I think, a lot of our talk. I'm really frustrated that we're not having more general strikes, more wildcat strikes.
Yes.
I mean, these people could shut the country down in a second now,
right?
If they wanted to. Well, not if they want. I mean, a lot of them don't know.
Right.
I mean, to be fair, I've seen enough documentaries of people trying to go on strike that don't even know. I mean, if you're from California, you know what a right to work state or a collective bargaining state is. Yes. And I'm here in Texas, and I learned what right to work was, just by being here doing my day job. I'm like, oh, this is what y'all do, because right to work is just abysmal. I don't know how it's such a euphemism, for just taking it in the rear, basically, Yep. But let me ask you just to kind of jump into it, because we're going to get into a bunch of things. But how long do you think this failed system can go before we get to that Marie Antoinette moment, because, like, for example, on average, capitalism gets bailed out every 4 to 7 years. And this is something the Reds don't like to talk about, right? And some quote unquote Democrats don't either. Because when you say that, they go, well, no, capitalism is the best system.
Yeah.
But it gets bailed out every 4 to 7 years. And more specifically, it gets bailed out a lot more frequently the last 2 or 3 years.
Yes.
We saw the fourth quarter of 2019 have almost $2 trillion infused into the banks with no crisis. And now it's been $1 trillion a day. Meanwhile, student debt is $1.3 trillion.
Right.
1 day of bank bailouts would pay for student debt.
Right.
So, I mean, without getting into all these different details, I mean, obviously, you know all these numbers that I'm tossing around. But how long do you think we can go before people just finally lose their shit?
Well, one of the things that I think the next 6 months is really crucial because capitalism is in a crisis now that has to do with it's not just debt and it's not just the usual kinds of things, because people are out of work now, and as long as people are out of work and they're not spending money, the system is really in trouble. And I think they don't really understand the trouble that they're in, and I think what's going to happen is that what I'm hoping happens is that people take advantage of the fact that they're not, as much as they can, not working, and try to organize against going back to work earlier. And hopefully that can be the basis for some sort of a movement where, I mean, my hope is gradually people start to take over my ultimate goal is to see people take over the workplaces. But sure. I think gradually, I think people are going to assume that, or begin to have more sense of their own power, the power not to work, the power to say, I'll only work under these conditions. And I think that's exciting. So, well, that's as much as I want to say about it right now.
Well, that's okay. I mean, and feel free to say what you want to say. I mean, it's called the bitter truth, not big wet kiss. So I don't care who gets pissed off or whatever. I mean, if you're concerned about anything, just feel free to say it.
Yeah. So, I don't really. I mean, within the next 6 months, I really don't think they can go on for months at a time with people not working. I think the stock market will crash, and then I think we're really in a position where, our problem, I think, Abe, is like we don't have a political party that can pull all these working class problems together into some sort of form that everybody can see and everybody can move to. And I'm not really talking about a political party that gets elected. Many years ago, Marx said, what is the Communist Party? All the Communist Party does is it takes the struggle of working class people, it pulls all the struggles together, it analyzes it, it shows them what it is, and then we keep going. And we just don't have that. We don't have that party right now. But I've seen some things that are really kind of encouraging to me. One is that there's a group, all these groups. I mean, I have criticisms of all of them, but I mean, they're one group in particular there's a group called the Movement for a People's Party, and they just got a whole bunch of Bernie people, Our Revolution, to get out of the Democratic Party and come to join them. So that's,
now, is that and I beg your pardon, is that Nick Branagh's organization?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not sure where that's going, but that 10,000 people that say, we're getting out of the Democratic Party, I think is significant. Sure. And I have a feeling that the next 6 months are going to be so intense politically that I think things are going to happen that, we didn't dream of, because things are really bad.
Right.
So.
Well, I mean, and you make a good point because I mean, and we've got a lot to cover, but the point you made a second ago was that how people don't understand, and it's almost like they're a walking Bible story. They just don't want to understand.
Yes.
I came up religious, and I got an early release for time served, so I've been out for a long time. but I appreciate some of the stories,
mm-hmm.
and I love the story of Noah, mm-hmm. because I remember the way I was taught. Where I went to church, I had a dark pastor, so he was just like, the problem wasn't so much that people weren't listening to Noah; it's just that he had no reputation. Mm-hmm. He was the town drunk. It mm-hmm. hadn't rained for 100 years, and yet he's mm-hmm. saying it's going to rain. Mm-hmm. And people were so concerned about how they were going to look, they wouldn't get on the boat.
Yeah.
So they were more concerned with how they look as a quote Democrat voting for Biden.
Yeah.
Because he's not Trump.
Yeah.
Even though Biden has more blood on his hands technically.
Yeah.
It's this tribal thing. And you mentioned Marx a second ago, and he made an assessment, in his manifesto, that you can't really aspire to run the empire without subjecting yourself to the ways of colonial imperialism. I mean, mm-hmm. and I'm paraphrasing that, but you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So how much when, it's almost like people were like, you're pretty outspoken in your belief system. I'm sure you get a lot of pushback. Mm-hmm. How do you view Americans finally rising up like we were doing 40, 50 years ago?
I think when I compare, I was 20 years old in, 1968 or so. So I just kind of got in at the tail end of the 60s. And I have to say that I'm more excited about these times than those times. And the reason is because there's necessity in this situation. There's desperation. And I think in the 60s, people kind of thought, capitalism can go on forever. And people had an outlet. And I don't feel like people have that outlet now. And I do think that necessity really kind of drives people to wake up. And if they don't have, they're not pushed against the wall, they find other reasons why we should keep going. So I think today is, as bad as it is today, I think it's harder and harder for people to make up stories about what's really going on. And I also think that, I'm no great fan of Bernie Sanders, but when he brought up the word socialism and made it okay, I think that at least the word is circulating now.
Sure.
And even if he's not a real socialist or whatever, the word is around and is a word that people are used to, and they're not red baited. Like I in the last 10 or 15 years when I've been teaching, I would bring up stuff because I'm a psychology teacher about alienation, and I talk about Marx's theory of surplus value and 20 or 30 years ago, I could talk about that and people's eyes would glaze over and they
right.
What the fuck is he talking about?
Right.
Now, in the last 10 years, the last 5 years I talked about it, you can hear a pin drop. People are listening. Sure. So I think there's room for the word socialism to be part of people's vocabulary. And I also noticed just in everyday life that the word capitalism is really used more with people. Like it used to be, people would use these euphemisms like business or free market or these terms that wouldn't call the system what it is. Now people are using that. And I think, the vocabulary is important. Like to have a word say, this whole system, what the bankers are doing, this is capitalism,
Right.
And what we want, even if, socialism's a lot more than, universal health care, but at least it's something that people can wrap themselves around. So I think we've got a vocabulary for rebellion, and I think we've got the conditions for rebelling at the same time.
Well, and to your point, though, I think it speaks to a bigger picture because I write for this website out here in Texas called the Texas Free Press, and I don't know how long they're going to let me keep doing it. They're largely a libertarian site, but they don't edit me and they don't censor me, and they just let me write my crap and not get.
Cool.
They never send me a nasty email saying, "Hey, you can't say that." So far I've been getting away with it. But I wrote a paper a while ago called "There's Never Been a Free Market," and the free market has always been a myth in this country.
Right.
But it's basically always been socialism for the rich, as Martin Luther King said, and rugged capitalism for the rest of us, right? And so that's the thing where, to your point, I'm not a Bernie fan either, and not for a while. And I forgave him his foibles in 2016. Thought maybe he changed, and then he blew his history, and I was just fuck him. Yeah. But all that to say that he did bring a vocabulary that was necessary for people to understand what socialism is. I mean, because you could break. I've had this Republican congressman candidate who's trying to run against Joaquin Castro, and he came on again Friday. He's going to be released in the next week or so. And last year when he came on, I just asked him, "Well, why are you running?" He said, "Well, I want to stop the spread of socialism." And I said, "Well, let me ask you something. Let's make sure we understand the definition of the word. Do you like airports?" And he's like, "Well, yeah." I go, "Well, the state or the county or the city runs the airport.
Yeah.
And that's why I can fly to LA to visit my mom for $150 round trip. Less now, obviously. But whereas if United or American owned the airport and ran the airport, that flight would be $1,500. Yeah. They would pass the cost on to me. Yeah. Hence capitalism. Yeah. Because the government's goal is not to, make a profit. It's to break even. Right. So they're not trying to make a profit. So they're not trying to gouge you. So they're charging United and American the fair market value to use the airport. Thus the costs are passed on to us. And how does the city, county, or state make their money? Well, they got the barbecue there, and they got the record shop there, and they got the bars there, and they charge $8 for a pint or whatever. And and that's a nice win-win. Everybody wins. Right. It's not I'm going to come in and put you in a gulag because you think differently. And honestly, I believe we should nationalize the banks. We should nationalize most of our major resources. Those should be called utilities and not business, because Jamie Dimon is an employee. He's an employee. He didn't start Chase Manhattan. He's an employee. Yeah. And by the way, even Steve Jobs got fired and he started the company. So take your free market asshole shit and, anyway. Yeah. But so moving forward, so what was your challenge with Occupy the first time, and what are you looking to do this time around?
Well, what I found with Occupy is I think the foundation of it was anarchism, and I know enough about anarchism that I don't have knee-jerk reactions to it. I mean, their form of getting together was the General Assembly, and the General Assemblies were great. I mean, at the heyday, you'd have, every day you'd have 150, 200 people deciding what to do. We had a wonderful time, a couple of times where we shut down the Port of Oakland. We marched, we lined up with the ILWU, and Occupy Oakland was very powerful. But the problem that we saw was, I think, the usual anarchist problem is, how do you coordinate this beyond the local level? In other words, how do you connect up what you're doing with what other Occupy is doing, and have, how do you group from the micro up? And we felt like people really didn't want to do that, didn't think that was important to do. And, as I said at the beginning, Abe, when we were really turned on by Occupy at first, because they were they were saying, this is capitalism, this is the problem. Right. And, their slogan, the 99% and the 1%, I mean, that's in our vocabulary now. So that was good, but I felt like they lost their focus from capitalism and social class to more like the garden variety of leftist causes. And I just felt it got, I felt like it lost their focus. Yeah. And so after 6 months, there was also another thing about it. I don't know how common this was in other Occupy cities, but in Oakland, there really was a major division between young people and older people. So a lot of the people in Occupy were probably 20, 22 years old. And there was no one, really very few people in their 30s or 40s. And then there were people like us that at the time we were in our 50s or so, and we had a hard time bridging the gap between us and the younger people in terms of the way they did things.
Right.
So, that's cultural. I mean, that's always going to be similar.
And then this is the thing, I'm having a big problem, at least the last decade. I mean, I'm 56 years old, so I'm not like 12, right? So I've been around the block a little bit. My dad's Palestinian, so my mom's Brazilian, so I'm a little dyed in the wool with this shit. So one of the things that started really pissing me off was to see the whole meet the new boss, same as the old boss, was the Occupy LA movement. Were willing to stand down after Mayor Villaraigosa gave them office space for $1 a month. Right? I was just like, you motherfuckers, that's not your job. You're supposed to tell him to go fuck himself and stay in the goddamn park.
Yes.
And that's the thing that, and I've been seeing it over and over and over. Bernie's capitulated, AOC from the first 2 weeks.
Yep.
She pulled that little Sunrise Movement stunt in Pelosi's office. And then like the mafia, they took her in the back room with rubber hoses, got her mind right, and they threatened to primary her. And 3 months later, she's on the cover of Rolling Stone and Vogue with Pelosi and Rashida Tlaib and all these. I'm like, you guys are done.
Yes.
Ro Khanna, every one of them. They just got co-opted. And again, you cannot expect to be a steward of this system and not be capitulated to the system.
Yeah.
That's what angered me about Occupy. And, and thank God Dapple was still Dapple, but Occupy got, because there was no central leadership, unfortunately, or fortunately, because he didn't get caught. But there was no central leadership, and as a result, there was no central platform.
Yeah.
So New York was doing something else, and LA was doing something else, and y'all in Oakland were doing something else, and some had more integrity than others.
Yes.
But when Mayor and that got leaked by the LA Times, by the way, that wasn't supposed to be a piece of news that I was supposed to know. It was like, and by the way, it was like section A, page 40 or whatever of the LA. It was not a headline that they were getting office space for $1 a month for 10 years. And I was like, God damn it,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah. I think what's really hard is to get an independent movement of the Democratic Party off the ground and functioning and getting working class support for it. Like, I don't know if do you know a group called Labor Notes?
No, I do not.
Labor Notes is a really interesting organization. It's been around for 40 years. They started, I think, 1979, and their whole thing is rank and file. They follow what's going on with working class people around the country from the point of view of the rank and file. So they've got groups that they've got a really wonderful website, news stories, and they really have organized a lot of working class people, but it's not the union leaders, Abe. Right. It's the rank and file and their strikes. And they're like another ingredient that really needs to be part of this. So like, when I said before to you about, the movement for a People's Party, maybe that's a little bit of this equation. My question is, for them, if it is, are they going to join with Labor Notes? Are they going to say that getting the trade unions to come into this, that's the key? And if they're not serious about that, then it's like, I don't know that I want to be part of this. But this Labor Notes is a really down home. They're very good organizers, and just to keep track of this it's just labornotes.com. But it's a really good. It's a good website. They have good organizers. They put out very good practical books on how to organize. So, that's another piece of the pie. Maybe people for a movement, people for a movement for a People's Party is a part of the equation. I think Labor Notes should be a part of the equation.
Sure.
What I'm also hopeful for is that there is a cooperative movement in this country, right? I mean, there's worker co-ops around. Some are bigger than others. And I saw some stuff that was encouraging to me. Like, there's a very good long-term co-op in San Francisco called Rainbow Grocery. And I heard recently that they are branching out from doing groceries to construction. So my hope is that, as a lot of these, like say capitalism, when let's say it maybe 3 or 4 months down the road, it's a little bit better, but you're going to lose a lot of small businesses.
Right.
And my hope is that maybe the co-op movement can expand into those small businesses and take them over, because they're for leveling the wages and an alternative economic system. So they might be able to take advantage of the situation and spread on the basis of the small businesses folding.
But it has to move out of the Democratic Party, right? I mean, like the Republicans notoriously hated the Tea Party, and I'm not a Tea Party person,
right? But
they notoriously hated the Tea Party worse than the Democrats.
Yes,
because the Tea Party was holding their feet to the fire and saying, "Hey, you guys are taking that money, to work against our interests. That's not going to stand."
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, they did it within the Republican Party, so it only lasted a couple of years. They got Rand Paul in there, they got a couple of guys in there, and then it went away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really went away because John Boehner couldn't stand them, Paul Ryan couldn't stand them. But then by the time Paul Ryan left, nobody really cared anymore. And they sort of just, Thomas Massey, I think, is the last guy that is a Tea Partier. And so, they just buy right into the rest of the corporate system. Doesn't it need to be a system or a situation where you've got, say, the Labor Notes or People's Party? They cannot remotely be close to the Democratic Party. The idea is to end these people.
That's right. I completely agree with you. And, the co-op movement is, they are not usually political. I mean, they pretty much keep it at the level of, workplace democracy, workers controlling things. I used to think that, this is the kind of group that the anarchists would be all for. But surprisingly, a lot of the people in the workers' co-ops are not necessarily anarchist or real hardcore leftists. And they're not really associated with the Democratic Party. So I think they could be pulled into this.
Now, when you say worker co-op, are you talking about the European model and trying to translate it to the United States, or what do you mean exactly?
Oh, I mean, like the co-op, there's a group, the bakeries, they have, let's see, there's a place in Cleveland that's a huge laundry and cleaning place. In other words, they're dotted around the United States. They do have there's an organization called GEO Co-ops, and they have a newsletter and they talk about all the co-ops around the United States. So it's GEO .coops, and they kind of coordinate and they give news about what's going on in the co-ops.
Right.
So, yeah.
So let me ask you, I kind of want to get into some other economies here. I want to get into a lot of what we talked about before, but wrapping up this first part of the show, for example, China, just upped their military spend from 150 billion a couple of years ago to 225 billion. They have exactly 2 bases outside of China.
Yeah.
They meanwhile, they've been able to create 600 million people into the middle class in the last decade, the fastest of any on record.
Yep.
And yet, when you bring that up, people go, "Oh, well, they're lying about their numbers." And I'm like, "And you trust our government to do what exactly?" They got Elliot Abrams running fucking Venezuela by the way. So, what are you trusting our government to say that's honest? But I mean, even if China was lying by half, 300 million people into the middle class is half the population of the United States almost.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm sorry.
So, what I think is really interesting about this is so much of what the Chinese are doing is the same things that people originally, when they talked about capitalism, this is what they thought was the greatest part of it. When Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, he talked about developing the capitalism develops the productive forces, right? Technology and material wealth and a better life for all. And China is, with the new Silk Road, China is developing the productive forces. And so that's unlike the capitalism here is it's based on its profit is based on the military. Its profit is on fictitious capital. And so I think part of the ironic relationship between the United States and China is doing better at the best parts of capitalism than the old-fashioned capitalists themselves are.
Right. Well, I mean, even their foreign policy. I mean, people look at me like I'm doing card tricks in front of a dog, but I explained to them. I said, "Listen, their foreign policy. We're going to have trillions of dollars flooding back to us in the next 5 to 10 years because the way the Chinese do their third world development, they don't blackmail some puppet dictator into buying a shit ton of equipment at ridiculous, almost payday loan rates to buy this equipment, mine their resources, enslave their people for 15 cents a day with no bathroom breaks, and then we buy their shit for nothing. Meanwhile, we pay this idiot $500,000 a year out of CIA money and insure his army. Mobutu is a good example, or the previous Venezuelan governments before the year 2000. So all that to say that now, moving forward, they make deals. They're grown-ups. They act like, listen, hey, we make peace with our enemies. Right. We make deals with our friends. We're going to go in there. We're going to give you a low-interest loan. Oh, and by the way, we're going to buy your stuff. We're not going to nationalize your stuff. So if China was dealing with Venezuela, they would have already made a deal years ago.
Yes.
To buy oil on the cheap. Venezuela would have still kept their deal. Yep. People have homes. People have incomes. People have free education. And that would have been the end of it. But we're just dicks. I mean, it doesn't take anything to feed. It's like $30 billion a year to feed everybody in the world. It's about $80 billion a year to house them. So for $100 billion a year, we could be the good guys.
Yep.
As opposed to $1.2 trillion a year to bomb everybody. Wonder why Europe is flooded with refugees, and nobody likes Muslims all of a sudden.
Yes.
And you're kind of going, well, if we didn't fuck with them, the example I like to use really brutal, bitter examples. I'm like, imagine you're some civil engineer in Tehran, and you went to work one day and you came home, and the United States bombed your apartment. And now you come home and your wife and your 3 kids are laid out on the sidewalk. Yeah. I just took a guy who probably went to University of Cairo, got his master's, making a nice little tidy living, was looking forward to being a granddad. I just turned that guy into a quote unquote terrorist. And that is United States foreign policy. Yes. United States foreign policy is, I'm a marriage counselor, but I have to sleep with your wife to get to the point of your problem. It's like, Bruce, I'm really sorry. I got to sleep with Barbara to make sure I can understand the crux of your situation. That's United States. That's United States foreign policy. We're a fucked up marriage counselor, and then we wonder why. And then we're like Shane, like Bill Hicks joke. We're like Shane in that movie with Jack Palance. We throw the gun at the sheepherder's feet, and then we shoot him. You see that? He had a gun. Like we're dicks. We're just dicks.
Yeah.
I mean, so what are your thoughts on moving forward? Because. And obviously we're going to do the show here in a couple of minutes, but what are your thoughts moving forward to get people to see what you and I are talking about? And not like we're right, we're the arbiters. I mean, I'm probably 70% batting average on this shit. I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
There's so much out there that no one sees.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on getting people to move forward and actually see this stuff?
Well, I think people will start to see this stuff as they deal with their actual situation around the virus. I mean, I think as people see things, unfortunately, I think we have to go from the local, which is not my preference, but the local is kind of like taking care of what your situation is in a given city. And then once that gets in place, I think, for example, here's a good example of this. The Amazon workers. Like the Amazon workers are striking, and when they strike, they have to think about their relationship to other Amazon workers in other countries.
Right.
So my hope is that, if people begin to see the the connections between what they're doing and what other people are doing, and try to form some sort of united strike or something around Amazon or other large corporations like Walmart, etc. I think that's a way for people to see the big picture. I think it's in economic terms, how do we win a strike? Well, in order to win a strike, we have to reach out beyond the people that are striking. We have to connect up with other people and try to get them to strike with us. And I think that's the way. I don't think it's going to come about through education. I think it'll happen more through fighting on the front lines and striking, and seeing that if you strike in one place, you need to connect with other people who are doing the same thing, right. But also connecting up with the community that you're striking in. So, usually what the media does, for example, years ago when we had a BART strike, the newspapers, the first thing they do is they talk about inconvenience to the commuters. And the BART people, the strikers, were trying to hand out flyers to the commuters saying, look, we're on the same side. Right. So, the rulers will always do this kind of divide and conquer. And it's up to us to get beyond our comfort zone of uniting with people that are like us and try to connect up with people that have the same kind of material interests as we do, and say, look, we're on the same side.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, everyone, well, this country is uniquely, religious.
Right.
Right. I think that's the hang up too. You say socialism, people equate that with anti-Jesus or something.
Yes.
Even though he was a black Palestinian socialist carpenter who didn't belong to a union. So there's that. But and he raised Lazarus from the dead for free, and he did catering without a union card. So fuck these people. But the thing that drives me bananas is if you're in Germany running for office or Britain running for office, mm-hmm. I doubt those people don't have a religious conviction. But mm-hmm. if any of them got up and said, "Yeah, Jesus told me to run," they'd be laughed out of politics. Even a guy like Boris Johnson would be laughed out of politics, as right wing as they are.
Yeah.
Here, we're the only country where faith is labeled as a virtue. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I also know that statistically, there is a movement away from organized religion. Usually we're like the last country when it comes to religious beliefs in God. But organizationally, people are not going in droves to church the way they once were.
Right.
So, I think that's a good sign. I think people have some sense that the religions are part of the problem. They have more of a sense. Of course, the fundamentalists don't. But I think the persons that are, politically moderate, I don't think that the religions have the same appeal to them. And I think they're withdrawing. I mean, they'll still say, I believe in God, but I don't think they go to church nearly as much as they once did. So even here, I think there's a movement against organized religions. I think people have a sense that they're complicit in all this,
Yeah. Well, listen, man. Let's kind of wrap this part up and move on to the next show here, guys. My guest has been Bruce Lerro, and he's the co-founder of Planning Beyond Capitalism. And you'll see part 2 airing later, or I think sometime next week. But by the way, patreon.com/thebittertruth. And if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.